Awesome. All right. Welcome everyone to session 2 of Getting into NLP Research Grad School Applications. I'm Khyati Mahajan, and I'm going to be hosting this session. Our moderator later on in the session is going to be Vlad Niculae, and our panelists are going to be Elizabeth Nielsen, McKenna, Salomon Kabongo, Sebastian Ruder, and Sian Gooding, and we're going to talk to them more. This is going to be the structure of the panel. We're going to have a brief introduction about grad school applications for 10 minutes. We're going to have the moderator and panelists roundtable discussion, which will last around 45 minutes and will focus on 4 main topics. They're going to be about graduate degrees in NLP, how to get into NLP research, careers in NLP, and the future of NLP as a field. And then lastly, we're going to have some question and answers with the moderators and the panelists, which is going to be 15 minutes. Please ask your questions through Dory. You can go to bit.ly or bit.ly/grad school NLP questions. And if you want a link to these slides, you can go to bit.ly/getting_research. So that's me. I'm the host for today. I'm a PhD student at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. We also have our organizers, Pranav, who's here, who's an ML engineer with NeuroAI and has been the greatest NAACL 2021 Senior D&I chair. We also have Luca Soldaini, who was around for the first session and is also a great organizer. He's an applied scientist at Amazon Alexa and the NAACL 2021 social chair. So let's talk about getting into NLP research. There are many different ways that you can get involved. The very first one, of course, is looking for opportunities at your own institution, at your university or your workplace, talking to people who have published in the past, and reaching out to them via email or after sessions, wherever you've heard them talk about their own work. Another way is to get involved with affinity groups in AI and NLP. There are a lot of groups that you can get involved in now. There's McKenna, there's Queer in AI, there's WinOp, Black in AI, Latinx in AI. All of them have their own websites that you can also visit and publications that you can look at. And you can also look at all the other kind of awesome work that they're doing and be involved with them. And then lastly, the third way you can do this is by doing collaborative NLP, by participating in community events such as with Hugging Face and Luther AI initiatives. Let's talk about what a typical PhD application looks like. And let's start that with acknowledging that there is no real typical PhD application. It varies significantly by the university and the country where you're applying. And you should always check the official websites for the most up-to-date information. But generally, a PhD application will involve 3 main aspects. One of them is going to be the statement of purpose. This is a letter to the admission committee in which you can explain why you're interested in getting your PhD and what your qualifications are. A great guide to this is linked here with bit.ly/what_SOP by Nathan Schneider, titled What Readers Look For in a Statement of Purpose. And it's really just your space to explain why you think you're going to be a good fit for being a PhD student and what really drives you in this interest of yours. The second part is going to be the letters of recommendation, which come from your faculties or senior researchers that you have worked with, or that you have, and more importantly, that you have a personal connection with. These are really important to support your application. And this is one of the reasons why, I guess, getting into research has been would be a really great first step. And talking to them, taking their classes, collaborating with them on research projects would be super useful. Lastly, there's your CV, your transcripts, GRE, TOEFL scores, and these are just exams or transcripts that might not be required based on which school you're applying to, but these are, they kind of make the official documentation part of your application. You should, again, of course, check the official application guide for each school. And a great basic question and answering, I guess, frequently asked questions document was made by Noah Smith, and you can access it at bit.ly/FAQ_Smith. There are also a lot of mentorship programs that are in place to help with these applications. There are several affinity groups for marginalized researchers that run these mentorship programs. One of them is with Queer and AI, who specifically support undergrads to find the queer community to review and discuss research paths and applications. You can access it at bit.ly/QNAI_mentors. For Black in AI, you can access this with bit.ly/BinAI_mentor. And Widening NLP also has a mentorship program in conjunction with their annual workshop at EMNLP 2021 or ACL 2021 or the StarCL conferences. The Queer and AI Grad School Aid Program is also a great resource. It's part of OSTEM, which is a nonprofit, and Queer and AI have this initiative to remove financial barriers for STEM LGBTQ+ students. They have refunds for grad school applications, GRE, TOEFL, other tests, and miscellaneous application expenses, which can cover up to $750 per individual. You can also ask senior queer folks for reviews of your application materials. And this is just a great initiative for the 2020 cycle for this, which ends on June 15, 2021. And the results will be announced at the end of summer. Definitely check this out. Go to for more information, go to bit.ly/QNAI_grad fee and definitely apply because we still have time. Another great resource is the ACL Student Research Workshop, and the ACL hosts this at many major NLP conferences. It is a great way to get your foot in the door and can enable student researchers to present your work and get great feedback, especially for the first research project that you're doing. Another way to get involved with the ACL community and then find more people who can help you with your research further. And it's highly recommended as a first target workshop, especially if you're a student independent researcher. You can, as a part of this, you get to present in the main conference session with their travel and registration subsidized, which is another great advantage. All right, with that, I'll pass it over to Vlad Niculae, who's going to be our moderator. He's an assistant professor with the University of Amsterdam. Just quickly, I'm going to introduce our panelists. There's going to be Elizabeth Nielsen, who's a PhD student at the University of Edinburgh. Nick McKenna, who is a PhD student again at the University of Edinburgh. Salomon Kabongo, who's a PhD student at Leibniz Universitat. Sebastian Ruder, who's a research scientist at DeepMind, and Sian Gooding, who is a PhD student at the University of Cambridge. All right, over to you, Vlad.
Thank you, Khyati. Let me My slides visible? All right. So with that, we are entering the panel roundtable part of this event, and we will begin with a short roundtable of introductions and experience sharing from your moderator, me, and the rest of the panelists. So I think my slide is first here. So I will briefly tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Vlad. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Amsterdam since September last year. I come from Romania. I didn't really know what a PhD was until around halfway through college when I started to enjoy school. I got my PhD about 3 years ago in 2018. And on my way to that, I studied in a bunch of places, mostly in Europe. So in Romania, in France, in the UK, which was in the EU at the time, in Germany. Then I got my PhD in the US, and I did a postdoc in Portugal. And in terms of experience sharing, I guess what really shaped a lot my grad school experience, and it made me think about these things forever in my work as advisor now in the future, is I went through a change of advisor in grad school. So I believe it's very important, to have basically to be in an environment where that is facilitated. But more about that during the panel. I guess that's all I have to share about myself right now. So let's move on to the next person. So everybody gets like roughly 2 minutes to stay within the allocated time. And up next is Elizabeth.
Hi, so I am Elizabeth. I'm originally from the United States. I am in the UK for my PhD. My background is that I actually started out in linguistics, and I went so far as to actually start a PhD program in linguistics, which is how I discovered that I didn't like doing linguistic research. So I quit. And then I did a master's degree in computational linguistics at the University of Washington. I then spent a year in industry working for Bose Corporation, trying to kind of get my programming skills good and solid. And then I came here. So if there's kind of a distinctive thing I have to add here, it's how not to correctly evaluate whether or not you want to go into a graduate program, and also how to tell if you're in the wrong one.
Next is Nick. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Hey guys, so my name's Nick. I also am originally from the US, where I did my undergrad degree in computer science. And I think like the funny thing, I guess, from my story is, so I was really geared towards industry in undergrad, and I did some like engineering and product management internships. And I really wanted to be a PM, so I went out and got a job as a PM and was working for a little while. And then I sort of had this change of heart. I was like, no, I want to go into AI. But I didn't really know what. I just knew that being a PM wasn't exactly for me after I had tried it. So I went to grad school first as a master's student in like general MS in AI here at the University of Edinburgh. And that gave me like space to explore and kind of test out different subfields of AI. And NLP really, did it for me. So I stayed on here to do my PhD. And yeah, so I guess for me, I mean, my perspective is like trying out industry and completely switching gears into something and using that experience to help me realize what I actually wanted to do.
All right, thank you, Nick. Salomon is next.
Hello, so I'm Salomon Kabongo. I'm currently in Hanover, Germany, where I'm doing my PhD. So I'm originally from the Congo, called, because usually there's two Congo, Kinshasa, for those that may know. Basically, I have a background in pure mathematics. I did mathematics back then at undergrad, and my grad journey started when I got a scholarship to do a master's degree in South Africa, where I did a master's degree again in mathematics before I fall in love with machine learning. And then I did another master's degree by the African Master of Machine Intelligence in Ghana, where I get to go deeper in NLP and so on. So yeah, so if I can add something more, is that I really think that when you have a passion on doing something that you find is valuable, you will always find something in your curriculum or something that may not be part of your degree, but that is important to you. Just go for that passion, because I think that when you do something that you like, you feel that fulfillment, and that is more valuable than just doing something for the sake of grade or sake of job or so on. So that's my own philosophy.
Thank you, Salomon. Sebastian is next.
Great, thanks. Hey everyone, so I'm Sebastian. I'm from Germany originally, where I did my undergrad as well in computational linguistics. And through my undergrad and through the choice of that, I already realized that I liked and enjoyed doing NLP, and did a couple of internships throughout that. But I had never really thought about research. I didn't really I didn't really know anyone seriously doing NLP research. And then after I did a semester abroad before I finished my undergrad. And my original plan was to get some industry experience, like a year in a small company, and then see after that what I want to do. And yeah, basically kind of coincidentally, one of the companies I was interested in made me aware of joint industry PhD programs. So I thought, if I'm going into industry anyway, I might as well do a PhD at the same time and combine both. So yeah. So in hindsight, I didn't give it that much thought, but yeah. So if I would do it again, I think I would kind of consider more the different options that are available these days. And maybe the second aspect to mention here is that as a function of that, of this kind of more unconventional environment, was that I didn't have many people around with really publishing experience in NLP venues. And that's something I struggled with particularly early on in my PhD. And I think what helped me in particular was first connecting with people, doing things to build a profile, and then yeah, just to get mentorship and collaboration from the second year, basically.
Thank you, Sebastian. And then we have Sean.
Hi, so my name is Sian. I am doing a PhD on text simplification and readability. Very quick plug, I'm actually doing a birds of a feather session on this on Wednesday. So if people are interested in that area, come along. So for me, I had quite a bumpy journey to get into graduate school, because I tried to do everything but research, but kept coming back to the fact that that was what made me, like, really lit me up. And it's funny because I think even when I was little, I was very much a research mentality person, because I liked breaking things and I liked building stuff and doing experiments and all this type of thing. But I don't think I ever made the association that you could do this as a career. And so it took me a really long time to kind of figure that out. And I have to say now I'm really, really happy kind of doing something that I feel really fulfilled in. But it took quite a while, and very similar experiences to kind of Nick and Elizabeth, in the sense that I tried stuff and dropped out of school. And so, you know, it's been quite a kind of journey to get to where I am now, but it can be done.
Thank you. So that concludes the round of introductions from everybody. I'm happy that you get to know us a little bit better. And in the next part, we have a bunch of questions prepared that we are going to discuss. And the first section of this is about graduate degrees in NLP. So the first question we're going to tackle is is a PhD advisable? How did you decide that you want to get into grad school? And Sebastian will answer this for us.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I think my personal decision-making process at that time probably wasn't that useful or that representative. But if I would recommend what to do now to people, I think I would firstly ask yourself whether research is a good fit for you. So whether you can see yourself doing research as a career. So whether you're excited and motivated by kind of doing scientific work, by trying to advance our frontier of knowledge, or kind of in contrast to that, whether you're more excited by making things that are actually used by people, or helping people with their problems, or building products that have millions of users. Because I think the cool thing about NLP these days is that you have these, that you can do both of those things maybe. And the second aspect, and the second thing to be aware of, is that a PhD in general is a big time investment as well. So you just have to decide for yourself whether in your personal life, given your circumstances, whether spending 4 or 5 years on something that maybe doesn't pay as much as an industry job, whether that's something you can do. And secondly, also whether you are okay personally working on maybe something that is very narrow and very specific for such an extended amount of time, or whether you think you might get bored or frustrated. Yeah, and in general, I think talking to people here at conferences, talking to people who've already gone through that, and asking them about their experience, and that's a great way to reflect and find out about that.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I agree. It is it is something that you want to gather, data and experiences as much as you can before you go into it. Of course, I would add, be a little wary and don't trust people when they aggressively say, no, a PhD is not for you because of so and so reason. There are people who will say this. Our next question is, what do you think sets apart a strong application for graduate study? And I will ask that question of myself, apparently in a weird did application sort of way. So Vlad, what sets apart a strong application for you? Well, interesting of you to ask, Vlad. Yeah, I haven't been doing this for a long time. But so from a very technical point of view, out of the checklist of things from the beginning of the presentation that you have to submit, right? I think many people will agree, but I definitely feel like the statement of purpose, so the motivation letter, is the most important, technical part, right? Because that's how the committee will get to know you. And at least where I work, the people who read these materials are, basically like me. So like your potential advisor and a committee of a very small number of people, right? This isn't, this differs so much across the world, right? Compared like applying to a grad department, a grad school program, where you have like a big committee of people. So this differs so much. For me, the motivation letter matters a lot. I don't ask for recommendation letters. CV sort of just a formal requirement to ensure that you have a master's, because the university really cares about this, right? And the letter is how I can get to know you and, see whether we share research values, whether we can learn and grow together and are interested in the same sort of thing, right? Yeah, what sets apart a good letter? More technically, I guess, there are many resources you can read for this. I like looking for the ability to engage with like some research, because practically, there's a limited amount of time to jump into research work. So, if you position your sort of research ideas in context of a few big papers, relevant papers that shows that you are already like in touch and can engage with the ongoing field of NLP. That's sort of what it is for me. I don't know if anybody else would like to add anything to that or contradict, of course.
I'm wondering, a lot of people say that now, you have to already have publications to get an offer for graduate school. And I don't think that's the case, but would you comment on that?
Again, differs a lot from place to place. Yes, it is the thing. I hate that so much. And like, I don't look if that's in the CV that you sent me. I try not even to look. But it happens. I've heard people who bragged about how they only consider applications who have at least an ACL paper and so on. Right? It happens. It's a sort of inflation of expectations in the field. I don't know. To me personally, like a short statement of purpose that shows how you think about things you want to do but haven't done yet, and shows that you can relate them to other things, is a lot more valuable than a paper somewhere, right? Of course, like in a paper, you may have already done that, and then you can, just copy paste some part of it. But not having a paper does not guarantee that for me, and I think for others too. Thanks. Shall we move to the next one? Spend a bit longer on this. What are the criteria to keep in mind when choosing a grad school or research group and a PhD advisor? Question for Elizabeth.
Okay, so I have a lot of opinions about this. So I'm going to combine it mostly to the advisor part, because I think that really is the most important one. You can be at a great program with a terrible advisor and have an awful experience. So I would say that there's kind of two different main things you want to know about an advisor. You want to know if they're a good research mentor, if they have those skills, and then also how they are to actually work with. That second one is harder to find out without actually talking to their students. So if you can do that, do that. That's usually going to be easier post-admission. If you've already gotten in with them, they'll like put you in touch with their students. But if you have the chance to talk to them, otherwise, do that. The other thing, how are they, like, do they have research mentoring skills? I think there is one pretty good way to get a sense of that when you're still kind of pre-application, just looking around, and you found maybe a few people whose research is good. And I think basically research is interesting to you. And if you want to know if those people would actually be good at mentoring the research, my belief is, and other panelists might think this doesn't hold, but I think that clear writers almost always make good research mentors, because the skills involved in both are almost always the same skills. It's taking something really nebulous and abstract and turning it into something operationalizable, finding clear examples. Those are often the same skill set. And I've had 3 different graduate advisors now, and the clearer the writer they are, the better they are at helping me figure out how to turn my research into something concrete. So if you're really just like in early stages and you're trying to figure out who might be good at actually advising you, I recommend finding single author papers by the people and seeing, do they explain well? Once you're actually past that hurdle and you're like, okay, I think they'd be good at actually doing the mechanical advising research stuff. What are they like to work with? Some questions to ask their students are things like, does this advisor spend time with you? Can you get a hold of them when you need to, and will they respond? Do they give you feedback on your papers? Is it enough feedback? Is it like honest feedback? Is your supervisor overbooked with things like teaching, or do they have time for you? If you're in a country or university where the length of degrees is variable, how long do people take to graduate? Is this a supervisor like in the United States who regularly has people taking 7 years to graduate, or are they graduating kind of on time? Are people who they supervise generally getting to work in the places that they want to work, whether that's academia or industry? And then like, what kind of group dynamics do they foster? Is it a competitive group? Is it a collaborative group? I think there's, some element of competition in any industry, but like, you really probably don't want the competitiveness to be with your peers who you're looking for feedback and support. So yeah, that's my opinion. I will let other panelists chip in if they have anything to add or contradict.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I have a quick follow-up question. So I guess in NLP these days, it's very rare to find for single author papers from people. Do you have like, I also maybe like clear presentations do they have a bit of this or no?
Yeah, so my places that I found this are basically clear presentations, and then like occasionally actually going back and looking at their theses, like their dissertations, if you can find them. I mean, that's probably a lot earlier in their career, but it's sometimes a good indicator. Again, maybe not everybody finds this to be true, but I have found it to correlate really well in my experience with advisors. So anecdotal.
All right, thanks. Does anybody else want to weigh in on this? This is a question that probably everybody has some experience thinking about.
Maybe I can comment on something that Elizabeth just mentioned. I think talking to other PhD student of the supervisor is very important. You hopefully will meet someone who is open and can tell you, okay, this is not a way to go. I will advise you to not continue the application. There may be some that will save your life somehow. So I will advise to try it as much as possible, but as he said, sometimes it's not possible. You just meet those people when you are part, when you are accepted or you have started working into a research group or a research center. But usually before you get that, you can maybe search them on Twitter or read the page of the research center and try to reach out to them individually. I think that is something important to keep, to try to do it when you want to make a final decision. Yeah.
Yep, certainly. You got to gather as much data as you can. Thank you. I guess with that, let's move to the next question. How do you structure a statement of purpose / research proposal, Nick?
So I think with this answer, I should just add the quick caveat that I'm not on an admissions committee, but I have talked to, a bunch of like successful applicants to PhD programs. So this is my sense of what's going on. Vlad, I really liked your answer earlier about the statement of purpose. And I think that you covered that like pretty well as far as I agree with that. So like, in my experience, like in the US, for example, the statement of purpose is kind of very important. And then over here in the UK and in the EU, there's also this sort of research proposal, which does carry its own weight. And in the UK, at the very least, the research proposal is kind of like your chance to stretch your legs and like show off your understanding of maybe like a niche problem space that you would want to be working on during your PhD. And so like, the whole point of the research proposal, I think, is to sort of like convince your reader that like you have some idea of a project which is useful and like interesting to the field and that you could make good progress on in, a 3 or 4 year program. And so with that, like maybe you have like some little bit about motivation of the problem, like maybe a state of the field if you can, get a gist of it, and then maybe some ideas that you might have on how you might approach the problem. And I don't think that like anybody is expecting you to have like a fully laid out plan of action of like exactly what you're going to do. But it's, the more I think thought through it is, the more convincing it will be for you. So that's, yeah, I think that about covers it. I mean, the SOP, like Vlad was saying before, it's sort of like unique to who you are because everybody has like a different story. So, that is like a good chance to, on the other hand, just like prove how qualified you are in general and anything else that makes you unique.
Yes, thanks. And definitely tell your story, right? That's what it's for. Like honest letters are great.
Yeah, I'm just thinking actually I'd be happy to share my one when I applied if that would be something that people are interested in.
Let's move on to the next question then. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Nick. What were the most useful resources for you in getting into grad school? This is a question for Salomon.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I will give my what works for me. I think the other panelists also may comment on that. So first, for my own case, I will start from my master's degree. I was really interested in getting to further studies. And I wanted to do it outside my country of origin, which was Congo by then. And then I think one of the things that I did first was connecting with people that I knew that did some further study got a scholarship that I was interested in. So back then we were having this African Institute for Mathematical Science that gave scholarships to people in Africa continent that want to do further study in mathematics. So I reached out to a professor and I talked to him, and that's how I got my first grad school experience, my master's degree. And if I can give some tools, like in general, a couple of them, I would say connecting with people is very important, like knowing people that you can talk to, people maybe that have got some prestigious scholarship that you are looking forward getting in the future. You don't have to connect to them like 2 weeks before you apply, but you can plan it maybe 1 year, you know that I'm finishing. I want to connect with this person and start making some kind of relationship. I don't mean fake relationship, but yeah, show that you're interested and communicate with them. And after that, there's something that I found quite important and useful was Twitter. Surprisingly, when I get into Twitter, I start, following people that are working in the area that I'm interested in working on. So I've started looking in NLP, some people that are working in machine translation. Of course, I could not talk to them directly, but I could at least follow the research, like they tweet, and that was an opportunity that I was getting. Usually when they are opening in the lab, they can post it on Twitter. And I think Twitter is a great tool and it works for me. Of course, I applied to a couple of them and got rejected in the wrong way, but I use that a lot. And some other things, I think the last one I can say is there is a mail list. I think it is called ML News, where usually professors are posting application or opening for machine learning specifically. And this is actually where I got the PhD that I'm currently doing. I just got to an opening and went through the process, and now I'm doing that. So that's what I can say as far as my experience is concerned. Maybe some other panelists can also add, jump in and give some other answer to this question.
Thank you, Salomon. Does anybody want to add anything?
I think for me, I couldn't have done either my master's or PhD without a scholarship. So actually, one of the things I'd say about scholarships, especially at Cambridge, is the earlier you apply, the more chance you have because they fill up as people apply. And so I found this list of resources that had all of the different scholarships, and I think that was really useful for me. So definitely check that out for the universities that you're interested in.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, like for me, it doesn't even register that people would do unfunded grad school, right? Yeah, very important. Like some people don't know that this is a thing. Yeah, this is a thing. We had like salaries. Use all the resources you can find. Very, very important. Like don't hesitate, right? It may seem like it's not for you, right? Maybe you don't really know what this is about, but talk and give it a try. Yeah. Our next question is, how did you face imposter syndrome during grad school and your application process? And this is for Sean.
So I have definitely grappled with imposter syndrome a lot. And I think part of the reason for that is because not having a conventional route to either undergrad or postgrad, I often felt quite behind in some ways. And I think for me, so I was kind of reflecting on this question, and there's kind of two different types of imposter syndrome. I think there's like external imposter syndrome where you compare yourself to the people around you or other people, and that makes you feel not very good. And then there's also this like internal imposter syndrome where you doubt your own skills, you doubt whether you should be here. And I think especially getting into Cambridge, I really felt very for my MPhil, I was thinking, should I be here? Is this, how did I even get in? I was very shocked, to be honest. I really didn't think that I would, which was the imposter syndrome. And I think some of the ways that I've learned to deal with that better. So for the external factor of like looking at people around you, I really like this idea of the anti-CV. So if I don't know whether people have heard of this, but it's this, it's like a CV of all of the times where things didn't necessarily go right for people. So it would be like, this paper was rejected here and I didn't get this job and I didn't get this internship. And I think it's very important to kind of keep yourself grounded in the sense that when you look at people's profiles on Twitter or their websites, like you're seeing the best version of themselves and you don't know all of the context and all the back kind of journey of how they got to that position. It doesn't just happen overnight. So I think I really try to keep that in my mind and I think it's very good to kind of be inspired by people, but I think there's a difference between like being inspired and being intimidated, or comparing yourself to people in a way that is going to hinder your own success because you're kind of paralyzed by how am I ever going to get to this point? And then I think in terms of the internal kind of imposter syndrome, trying not to be a perfectionist, trying to be kind to yourself as well, because I think a lot of the time this imposter syndrome comes from being so self-critical, overly self-critical in a way that you just wouldn't ever be with anyone else. So I think those two things, like keeping yourself grounded in the context of, when you compare yourself to people, you're seeing their kind of final polished journey, and also just being kind and accepting and believing in yourself. But I think genuinely a lot of people do still, I don't think you ever kind of get rid of that. I think there's always these doubts in your mind. And I think you just have to learn how to manage it in a way that isn't going to kind of get in the way of your progress.
Yeah, absolutely. It never goes away. Yeah.
I think that that, first of all, that was really well put. Like, thanks for that. I mean, I face that as well myself. And if anybody else is, feeling that way, like, oh, what can I do? Is there anything that I can actually like take action on to make myself feel better, as if I'm like improving or something? So one thing Vlad pointed out earlier about like looking for papers in the application process or not, like this is a huge hurdle that not a lot of people have when they apply for a PhD. But there are other things that you can do that are not a paper that also show and like demonstrate your ability as a researcher. So like one thing that I had done before applying, so first of all, I didn't have a paper when I had applied, but something that I did have was participating in a reading group with one of the professors that had written me a recommendation letter. And so I was able to like show up every week and have a real discussion with like the other students in that professor's group and talk about papers. And that was like a good way to like get a feel for the field, and also to sort of prove myself. And I think that probably added something to the recommendation, I assume. But there are other things that you can do, such as that, or starting doing a little bit of research with a professor, even if it doesn't lead to a publication. It's a way to make progress and help with that imposter syndrome.
Exactly. And like Sean said, yeah, like be kind with yourself. Like remember these things. Remember, you actually did lots of great things, right? You put in a lot of hard work. Let's move on. We're kind of spending a bit more time than our target for each question. But good that next one is on me, so I can talk faster. What aspects of the labor environment should I keep an eye out for when applying to a PhD program? Yeah. So there are many facets of spending like 4 or more years somewhere, right, in a job. And Elizabeth already pointed out a lot of important ones about like the group dynamics and kind of like the healthy like environment with your colleagues. But there are also some slightly more external and slightly more like indirect, but not always indirect factors that are really important. And there are surprisingly huge differences from country to country, from school to school. And when I was applying for master's and PhD programs, these things were not on my radar at all. So happy to see that overall people are more and more aware of this sort of differences. But yeah, like, are you gonna get a contract, or are you gonna be paid on a stipend? Or I didn't even consider this, but yeah, or are you not funded at all? That is significantly worse than being funded. Having a contract means expectations are clear. You like legally cannot be asked to do what is not there. This is important. Are you going to be an employee of the university, right? Or are you or not? This may seem frivolous, but it's not. It's very important, especially if you are a migrant, like I was throughout grad school. This has to do with pensions. Are you accumulating a pension or not, right? This was not something that was on my radar in my 20s. It should have been, visa aspects, like it may be that from a technical error or something like this, you might end up in a corner with your visa in the middle of your grad school program. This sort of happens sometimes. It's very bad. Are salaries different? Do you get like negotiated, or are you on a grid? It's important to know. Is there a grad student union or something like this? Do you have like channels that are external to like your direct superiors? If you face any kind of injustice, or abuse, where can you go to? All of these things function so differently, like from place to place, that it's really important to try to ask a bit about it. And from my own experience, can you change advisors? Is there even support for this in the program? Is there history of this? Is it considered something normal that happens? Makes a big difference. Of course, everybody else feel free to chime in if I forgot something. Oh, mental health resources at the university. Very important things to look for, just their existence. It's sometimes not a thing. If not, let's move on to the second part of our Q&A panel. This is about getting into NLP research. So how to conduct or manage online research collaborations, especially under current circumstances. Sebastian would like to talk to us about that.
Sure. Okay. I don't think I have a foolproof plan or a silver bullet or anything for research management or organization here. I think in general, particularly within the current situation, I think the most important thing is just to be kind and respectful of each other's circumstances. So just be aware that even though your country, the situation might be improving, your collaborators might not have it as good. So just not be not to be as laser focused on the next deadline as before. I know as a PhD student, where you want to get out papers, that's difficult, but I think your advisors and people in your networks will definitely be understanding. And I think as well, if you're facing challenging circumstances, just being open with your collaborators, because I'm sure they would understand. And then I think maybe a bit more broadly about research collaboration or managing collaborations. I think a lot of collaborations I've done through graduate school were remotely. So that was so for my first long paper at a conference, for instance, I only met my collaborator in person at the poster session of that paper. And I think as we've all experienced with remote collaboration, there's increasing challenges. So I think communication is very important. Just writing one more email or one more chat message more, just to make sure you're on the same page and you're not kind of assuming things or expecting something that the other person might not be aware of. I think similarly, similarly, just making sure that you set the proper expectations at the beginning of the collaboration or throughout, and make other people aware of as things change, and just to make sure that everyone is kind of on the same wavelength and really there's no misunderstandings, because I think that's kind of one of the bigger issues in collaborations.
Very, very important points. Thank you, Sebastian. Yeah, we're it's great that our field really fits so well on the mold of like working online, working remotely. I don't know, compared to like if we have to be next to a particle collider or something. So yeah, that's a great way, even like even when working in person, right? It's great that you don't really like, you're not limited if your research interests change, you're not limited to working with possibly the small group of people who are in your lab, right? If you have remote collaborators, those can be like a great escape towards like maybe like a shift in your research interests. Shall we move on? How does one keep up with the latest research and papers? Question for Nick.
I think I can suggest like a three-pronged approach to this one. First is like going out and actually doing the work yourself and like finding papers that are new and exciting. I mean, everybody here is doing this right now. You're at NAACL, you're like at a major conference. So pay attention and, you know, search around and see what's interesting to you. Another cool thing that I like to do is sometimes mining papers that I like for the things that they cite, because like all of research is a conversation, you know, built on lots of papers over time. And so it's sometimes helpful to go back in time a little bit. And you can use like the ACL anthology or like Google Scholar to do that same thing and do really targeted searches. Another strategy is like getting research just sent to you. So Archive and I think Semantic Scholar, they have like these subscription services where you can just like add keywords of the kinds of papers that you really want to know about when they get like immediately when they get put online. So you can just sign up for those and just get like an email kind of update every now and then of papers that are in your topic area and maybe in a field of interest for you so that you can stay on top of them. And I would say like a really fun third strategy is to maybe form like a peer group and share papers with each other. Like if you have a shared interest, maybe you could set up some kind of thing where like you meet together and discuss a paper or two, or if not even meeting, just sharing papers that maybe someone in your group finds interesting. And that can be really useful if you have like a sort of special topic area and you know some other people like maybe in your program or not from your program even. It's a good way to meet other people.
Great strategies. Thank you for that, Nick.
One of the things that I really enjoyed was Sebastian's email newsletter for keeping up with current papers, because actually it's like this question, how do you keep up with the latest research and papers? Well, you can't keep up with all of it. So I think the keywords thing is one thing that's really good. Like if you have your niche, like you can keep up just about probably with that. But sometimes obviously it is good to have more of a general feel for what's going on. And I've found like blogs or like hot takes from conferences or like Sebastian's newsletter, these sorts of things are really, really useful for that. So there's some good resources out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like be kind to yourself with this as well. You don't have to actually read everything as soon as it comes out. It's not it's not always healthy. When and how did you get into NLP research, Salomon?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting question, especially for me because I did, as I said previously, a background in mathematics. It was kind of pure mathematics. And I was kind of frustrated because back then, after graduation, I didn't know where I'm going to work because I've never seen any company looking for mathematician. So I was, my colleague, my friend that did law, some other discipline was telling me that, okay, now that you're done, what are you becoming? I say, I have no idea. I just know how to do math. So I was in a space of frustration, I can say that way. And when I finally met machine learning in general in South Africa then, and I think all the block come now together, I could understand that, okay, all the differential equation I've been studying, all these things kind of make sense now. It can do something practical. So like, it was like my heart got open. I said, why I didn't see this long time ago? And then something surprising was that I'm originally French speaker because in Congo we speak French. And then I had to do a lot of learning process to learn English and then do a master's degree in English. And I was actually thinking for people that could not speak English, because a lot of resources, especially also in machine learning, are dominated in English. And so that's what actually dragged me to go to NLP, because I was asking, okay, wait, is there a way that, because I had to spend 6 months in Kenya somewhere just to learn English, I said, is there a way to speed up the process? Can we like build some stuff that will help people like do some learning, a resource that is in a target language, and find technology to help them in that process? So this is where I discover machine translation. Actually, I didn't know the term by then. I just thought that, okay, this should exist. And I started searching around and I came across it, but unfortunately there were no translation in my language. Then that motivated me to go to learn resources, and I found myself in Masakane. So just like by noticing a problem, this is actually how I got myself inside NLP. So, and yeah, every day I keep now enjoying the field because I feel comfortable in that. So basically I started getting it when I started my master's degree, and day after day, I keep expanding my interest and so on, yeah.
Great, thank you for sharing with us. I'm going to move on to the next question to speed up a bit. How to approach potential research mentors, Elizabeth?
So I've never been a research mentor, so I can only tell you from my end, which may not be as informative, but my first piece of advice is, if you're going to email somebody to see if they want to be your advisor, check their website first, because a lot of people who get a lot of email from people who might want to be their advisees have like a whole section of like, I can help you if you fall into this category, please ask this kind of question, I can't answer this kind of question. Look at that in detail before you email anybody. If you're hoping to make a connection with some potential advisor and you have a current advisor or mentor who you think could like give you an email introduction, that's much easier to get somebody to actually respond to you if you have some kind of actual connection like that. If you have a chance to talk to somebody you're interested in working with at a conference, take it, even if it seems scary. It's much easier to, again, get on somebody's radar if you're not just jumping into their email inbox, which there's too much stuff in already. If you are kind of having to just send them an email, I mean, people have been there before and it isn't the end of the world, but there are some things to kind of consider. One is that most academics don't like email and they don't like responding to it. And so you want to make your email easy for them to respond to. And you want to consider, what is the goal of the person who I'm writing to, and how can I make that goal easier to achieve rather than harder? And so their goal is to get good, sharp students who will help them advance, who they will like have a good time advising, right? And so you want to like make it clear that you are a good, sharp student who they will enjoy advising. But you don't want to ask them really super open-ended questions that they will have to take a million years to answer, or questions that are answered on like the graduate school website and things like that. If you have a very, very specific question to ask them about, like, I am going to propose this research project or something like that, then go ahead and do that. But I would say stay away from open-ended questions, long emails, vague requests, things that you could get elsewhere, because that kind of thing is not going to make them think that this person is going to make my life easier. Again, I've never been on the other end of this, so this is just my advice from this side.
It is very good advice. Thank you, Elizabeth. How was your first publication process, publication experience? How did it look like, Sian?
So I really had no idea what I was doing, and I was very, very lucky to have, so I worked with a postdoc who kind of helped me through the process. So I even found some of the terminology quite confusing. So one of the things, I don't know how familiar people will be with the kind of process, but there's this term camera ready, like your camera ready paper. And I literally thought that meant that they wanted to take an actual photo of the paper / or like take a video of the code. Because I also found it really odd that I didn't have to like submit the code with the paper. So like this is where I was at. So that caused a big laugh in the department, like the fact that I thought that that's what that meant. And I think there's a bit of a steep learning curve with that process initially, but once you've done it once, it just becomes so much easier every time. And I mean, you know, even navigating the kind of like SoftCon or like these platforms that you put the paper on. And I remember for this first paper, you know, checking it like 100 times re-download, and it was like paper 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because I was just so nervous that I hadn't done it right. So I think it was a really, really exciting thing. It is amazing to be able to kind of have an idea, write it up into something and share it with the research world. But I think for me, I was very privileged to have someone who could help me with that. I'm sure there are online resources, and people generally, I think, would be very supportive and happy to help if you can kind of establish contacts in the research world. But yeah, so it was a bit of a steep learning curve, I'd say. And I think the other thing I would say is very normal, or at least for me, I don't know about other people, but it's very normal to get papers rejected. And I think this is something that isn't really spoken about, especially like when you first start publishing, because I had all this build up, like, putting the paper in, and it got rejected. And I was like, wow, that's it then, that's the end of that. And they were like, no, you've got to keep putting it in. But I think that is part of the process. I think peer review can be amazing. It can really help you improve your work. You can really learn a lot from it. And so I would say, that's another thing that I learned from that, which is like, it's okay for it to be rejected, and actually it can make the paper a lot better. So.
Absolutely, it is a part of life. Thank you. Our next question is, what pre-doctoral research experiences you think could better prepare a student for graduate studies? Elizabeth.
So I think this depends a lot on what your background is. For example, I came from linguistics. So for me, spending some time in industry was really helpful for just making sure I know how to like structure a large code project in a way that won't cause problems down the line. Things like that can be really helpful if you're not coming from CS. If you do come from CS or NLP specifically, I would say that one of the best preparations for graduate school is simply reading a bunch of research and learning to figure out what makes what is a good thing that this experiment did, what is a bad thing this experiment did. Learn to judge papers on things other than just did they break state of the art. Learn to look at a paper and think, okay, what is the next thing I would do with this paper? If you start like developing the skill of asking research questions early, that's a really, really great skill to have, because it's really hard. I think at a lot of stages of your career, it's really hard. So the earlier you can kind of get practice being like, okay, I want to study NLG. Okay, that's not a research question. How can I actually come up with research questions that I could test? I think also figuring out what research looks like. So I think we talk about research as though we all know what that means, but so a researcher wakes up in the morning, they sit down and they what, right? Like figure out what that is and if it's something you actually like doing. So that's my advice.
Thank you for that, Elizabeth. Yeah, with that, we move on to the third part about careers. All right, so what is the difference between doing a master's followed by a PhD right after undergrad, or gaining work experience before starting a PhD? A question for Nick.
Yeah, I think this is like a really interesting question. I am the first person in my family to do a PhD. And so when I was first thinking about going to grad school, I didn't have a lot of people around me that could really like give me useful advice on anything, pretty much. So I was at first saying, after I had done my undergrad, I did a year in industry, and then I was like, I think I want to go to grad school. I'll start with a master's. And people in my family were like, oh, you should do a PhD too. Like, that's just the ladder of success. It's like PhD is the best you can do. But like, every degree is useful in its own unique way. And like doing a master's is itself useful by itself, even if you don't do a PhD. If you want to do research, you probably need to do a PhD, but like if you want to do something else, you might not need that. And so I think that like first understanding what it is you actually want to get out of your education and what you want to do after is probably the most important thing. The order and like how much time you take in between degrees is it's so not an issue. Like you can take as much time as you want. Everybody's life is different and it's not a race. And I think that in the UK and the EU, it's kind of structured in a way which makes that easier, because there is sort of this expectation that going into a PhD, you're ready to just immediately jump into research without needing to take like special classes or something, essentially doing a master's. they basically expect that you've kind of done a master's by the time that you've gotten to a PhD. So you can sort of take it one step at a time. Doing your undergrad, getting more specialized in a master's, and then at that point, maybe making the decision, is research right for me or not? And so that's, I think, the biggest thing is maybe just taking it one step at a time, and at your own pace, and try not to fall into that hole of like, oh, I need to be doing everything all at once, because life is not a competition. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what I would say. Don't get caught up with like that kind of mentality.
Very good points. Yes, thank you. Indeed, in Europe, yeah, often it's expected, right? Like where I am, it's actually required. You can't start PhD without a master's. Just wanted to add that. How hard is it to transition from academia to industry, or vice versa? If I'm not sure in which direction to go, should I start with academia? Question for Sian.
I'd say if you're not sure what direction to go, starting with academia might not be a good shout unless you're doing short masters. For me, I think one of the things to say is it really depends on your circumstances, because I didn't have any children, I didn't have a family. That, for me, it was just me on my own. It was easy for me to move and kind of start something new, and I don't think that is as easy for people depending on their background and financial circumstances. I found it hard, but also incredibly rewarding. And also I hated my industry job. So for me, it was actually a real relief. Like, part of the reason that I orientated myself back towards research was I could tell that kind of the work that I was doing, similar to Nick, I was like a product manager, and I kept kind of thinking about research, and I was really, like on my lunch break, trying to read papers and stuff. Like, seriously, I could just tell that was the way that I wanted to go. So I don't necessarily think it's difficult, especially if you're doing it for the right reasons. But I'm not sure with respect to which one to start with. I think, again, it's quite an independent decision. And I think some of the feedback, like some of the answers for questions that we've had today, are really useful in that. Like, look at the labs, get a feel for the environment, especially at university as well. If you're going off to do a PhD, where are you going to live is a big difference, like where you move. And these are things that you probably should factor in, especially because if you've got an industry job, for me, it meant I had to move across the country and kind of do all of this to switch. So I don't know that I've answered that very well, but I think it's a difficult one to answer because it's very, situationally dependent.
It is. Thank you. How does doing an internship differ from doing research in academia? How was your experience, Salomon?
Yeah, I can say that the difference is first in terms of the time. I think the duration of the two. Usually internship is often, from my experience, shorter than doing, let's say, PhD or something like that. Research in academia, which take like years, 3 to 4, even 5 years or so. So, usually when you get into an internship, there's something like the project is, everything is designed usually, and you just have to work within that time frame and with that specific topic. But usually for the PhD or for the other research related stuff in academia, you have some kind of freedom. You have a big picture, and you can a little bit explore more, and you can take the risk of spending time working 1 or 2 months on something that at the end doesn't work at all. But this kind of adventure is not always possible when you do internship. Yeah.
Very helpful. Thank you, Salomon. What career experiences do you think are most fruitful for building a professional identity in NLP, Sebastian?
Cool. Okay, it's interesting. So I think my answer is maybe in 2 parts, or I think a professional identity is both kind of the internal identity, how you perceive yourself in relation to your peers, and the external professional identity, how you're perceived by others. So with regard to building your internal identity, I think the main thing that is important to basically develop, maybe something both research taste. So I think some people have referred to that as like a taste for the kind of problems you're interested in or the kind of projects you enjoy working on. But beyond that, I also think it's important to figure out which part of the research process, or in general, like where you have the skills, where your personal preferences are the most useful. So do you particularly care about having proving something and having a paper or project that has very beautiful theory, or do you want something that is very useful in practice? Do you care about having very clean code, or do you have a particular tendency to being able to get code to work well, or are you more excited about writing beautiful papers and working on the narrative? So I think that kind of teaches you a bit about how you work yourself. And I think it's also particularly useful for finding collaborators, because I think the best collaborators are the people who can complement some of those things. So maybe if you're really good at writing a paper, you can work maybe more with people who are really like kind of getting into the weeds in the code. And secondly, with regard to the external aspect of the professional identity, I think here, like one thing that is, I think, useful is to figure out what your overall research area, research focus is, and kind of communicate that to others. So whether that is through publications that follow a particular trajectory, or surveys, blog posts, where you kind of communicate a bit more of a wider view in that topic to others. So in general, I think it's even though like you don't want to be pigeonholed into just like one area, but I think in general it's good to be known for something in particular, a particular area, or as an expert in a particular field. And then if you have already achieved that, you can still kind of expand from that and do other things.
Indeed, thank you. And they're all very, and interest make is very valuable, right? Okay, if we move on, we have quite not a long time to cover the rest. Our next question is for Elizabeth. How does research differ between academia and industry? If you wish to get into industry research, is it advisable to do a PhD?
So to answer that first one, there's different kinds of research in industry. There's quite applied research. There's more like kind of blue sky abstract research in industry. That kind is, I think, rarer overall. You tend to have at least some sort of relationship in industry to some sort of product that at some point could exist. That may be less true at, say, like a DeepMind kind of place, but I think for the most part, the audience you're considering in industry research is some sort of application that your company might like to create. There is still an audience to consider in academia, but it's a little broader and less maybe application focused. You often have to consider like what a granting agency might want to give you grants to do. If you're a student, you might have to consider what your supervisor wants you to do. So there's not like there are any places where you're doing totally unconstrained research but I think the constraints are a little more obvious in industry. And I think it's a matter of personal preference, which kind you like better. Is it advisable to get a PhD? I think it depends on the kind of research you're talking about in industry research. Again, the blue sky stuff, I think you might be a little better served by having a PhD. In that situation, I was, again, in applied research before I started my PhD, and I was in a position where there were like 3 of us on a team, 2 of us had master's degree, 1 had a PhD, and we did the same work. So I don't know that in those applied situations, it is as important to have a PhD.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. We only have 2 minutes for the entire section 4, and we have to move into Q&A from the audience in 2 minutes. So sorry about that, but I'm going to pick one question that I think is particularly important from this set, and we only have time for this one. So the question is, how do you grapple with the ethical implication of developing NLP, including biases in algorithms and data? And Salomon is listed to talk about.
Oh, yes, sure. I think this is a concern. I think, as you mentioned, that's an important question, and especially in NLP, where we do things that we have impact on people. Let's say when you develop some kind of product where people will be using, you need to be careful of not just relying on blue score or mathematical evaluation, to claim that your system is performing better, because there may be some biasness that the evaluation is not able to find out. So this is something that, for example, I said maybe previously that I'm also part of Masakane, where we are actually looking into how can we evaluate, like when we build a machine translation system, can we have people that are actually speaking those languages evaluate the translation that we are providing. So when, for example, you are a research scientist working on Kikongo and you don't know any word of Kikongo, that is a serious problem. That is very dangerous, because you may just rely on some metric and publish your outcome, but there may be some issue that only someone who has maybe a limited knowledge or knows how to speak those languages that can actually comment or actually share it with the other colleague that can also give the view on that. I think we don't have a lot of time, because this will take a couple of minutes again to talk about, but if I can just try to summarize, is that we better collaborate with institutions or people that, for example, if I speak only on machine translation as something is a product that you develop, you need to talk to people that are actually able to give valuable evaluation of what your system is doing. Don't just rely on people in your lab or people that are technically sound to solve a specific problem, but look actually to people that are affected by the technology that are being deployed, not just people that are building it. That's very important to keep in mind.
Thank you very much for that. Absolutely. Does anybody else want to comment before we move into the audience Q&A? So, oh, and actually I need to refresh this, I think. Give me a second. Pranav has very kindly updated the slideshow live with some Q&A. But since I was in the middle of the presentation, this did not automatically reload for me, I think. But I should have it now.
I will post the first question in the chat. Till then, Vlad sorts out.
I have it now. Sorry. It's just a matter of computer loading very slowly. I'm from a country where there is practically no research on NLP, so making a paper is honestly not quite feasible. Bearing this in mind, is it possible to access a postgraduate program? Who would like to take this question?
Maybe I can quickly say something on that. Basically, when I did this, there were no NLP research in my country back then when I started doing NLP. So one of the things that I did was actually reaching out to people that I know that were actually in the science, like were in the university, people that I could see on LinkedIn, for example, or on Twitter, that have written that they have interest in machine learning or something like that, and trying to reach out to them if we can have like some kind of book reading or book club and try to build a community, because if you are interested in doing this, you can actually see how to build a community with people around you, because the more we are, the more we can help each other, and that can, a paper can come out of this kind of collaboration. So try to find people as much as possible. The interest may not be strictly NLP, it may be computer vision, but at least they may have some knowledge of NLP, and together you can build something together. This is actually what works for me during that phase of my life.
Yeah, I'd also add on that as well. So for tech simplification, we've got a Slack group, which has researchers from all over the world. And so if you know a particular area that you're interested in, there's often these kind of hubs where people are talking about collaborations, and you might have some look there if you know a particular area that you're interested in.
Yep, absolutely.
I would like to add that in the start of presentation, we gave you some resources like how you can get into Korean AI research group, how you can get into Black in AI, and also regarding Hugging Face research groups, and also Leoter AI research groups. So I will send all these links later on to all the attendees, so you can join these and maybe collaborate with everyone.
Yes, thank you, Pranav. Yeah, use all the resources you can get. Ask people for help. We work online so much is doable online that is very likely to find people who can give support. How do you arrange 3 letters of recommendation for a PhD application if you are a master's student, considering that you can qualitatively work with 1 or 2 professors during the 2 years at the maximum while extensive coursework? Good question. Does anybody have experience to answer this?
I can only speak to my own experience here, but my feeling is that you don't need every single letter of recommendation to come from a person who's been your personal mentor that you've worked intensively on research with. Some of them can be more people you've done coursework with but haven't worked intensively with. As long as you've got, like, I think, you know, one really solid letter of recommendation from somebody who you've worked with extensively is worth a lot more than having like 3 vague ones, but having a vague one in there is not the end of the world. Again, that's one person's experience, so feel free to jump in if you've had other experiences.
I can add there are things that are sort of like not quite research, but very relevant. Like I was using early on some recommendation letters from open source software developer leaders that I worked on, right? Yeah, not everything has to be like a research professor at your school, right? And I mean, there are many places who like don't ask for letters of recommendations at all. So those are great. To what extent does school prestige matter for jobs in academia or industry? Somebody with experience in either, could they clarify?
One thing that I think is good when you get to research level is that there are so many excellent labs that whilst obviously I think, you know, like speaking from the experience of being like University of Cambridge, I think it's useful to the extent that maybe you might get a second look at your CV, but actually how well you do as a researcher is quite independent of that. And I think as your research career goes on, like it's much more about your record of kind of publications or presentations or engagement with the community and these sorts of things. So I think actually applying to places based on prestige isn't a good tactic. It would be good to kind of look at lab culture. And, you know, I think Elizabeth's answer earlier was really, really good at that, like explaining that, you know, get a feel for the group and look at, are people finishing their PhDs on time? Are people publishing and these sorts of things? It's way more important to look at that than the like prestige of the school, I'd say.
I completely agree from the academia point of view.
Yeah, maybe to add something on the industry point of view, just to add to what was previously said as well, I think if you talk to people at a lab, just checking what kind of careers or what kind of trajectories those people in the lab went on to, and if that's and if you'd like to go on to similar places. And as well from an industry perspective, I think we're generally more looking basically looking at kind of the publication track record, looking at overall the strength of the person's profile, rather than what particular institution or what particular lab they came from. And I even think that like And kind of looking lately, probably some of the strongest candidates we've had indeed came from like lesser or like lower prestige institutions, and while still having strong research profiles. Because I think in general, it's it's more difficult to build up a strong profile if you're perhaps in an environment which isn't that conducive, or where the supervisors don't have that much experience yet. So showing that you have developed into a strong researcher nevertheless, I think, is even kind of a stronger point in your favor.
Thank you, Sebastian. Our next question from the audience is, how do you know you will be a good fit with others in your lab or cohort? Anybody like to take that?
I can maybe offer some perspective, I guess. So one good thing is obviously just to like reach out and have a chat with them before even you have to apply. But I think also there's like a nugget in here of the whole issue of imposter syndrome. Like if you get in and you're part of the lab, then you're in the lab. And like, obviously you should be a great person and get along with everyone else, but I don't think that you should put that on yourself to like fit yourself into the lab culture per se. Like you can stand on your own and bring what you bring to the table. But by all means, definitely please do some research ahead of time and make sure that you do get along with the other folks in the lab and the supervisor.
Oh, and yeah, like your lab and cohort will change. People will join after you too. So like you can't really know everything up front. But yeah, so in the US, there's this concept of visit days, which as far as I know, isn't much of a thing in the European places I've been or I currently am. But that's a good way there in the US to check, like to get to meet the lab, right? In Europe, like we don't have that, but try to ask, right? Like if you're very strongly considering a place, try to ask to hang out with them. I don't know, online or ask the potential advisor to connect you, right? I think it's very valuable. Our next question is, for undergraduates wanting to apply directly to a PhD program, what is the extent of research experience expected from an undergraduate? Are one or more publications before applying de facto requirements for acceptance? And of course, I would add the caveat here, it differs so much from program to program. Would anybody want to comment what it's like in their experience? Did anybody here do this, apply directly from undergrad?
I did this once and then I did a master's and came back. So I've done both paths. I would say far more important than having a publication is having somewhat specific ideas of what you want to do and some idea, at least an ability to demonstrate that you know what research entails. And again, this is going to vary from program to program, like Vlad said. But I think if you put on your application, I want to study dialogue and that's it, that might be a little bit uninspiring compared to being able to say I have these specific questions. And I think that's probably more important than having paper or not.
Yeah, I agree. Of course, except for the places where there actually is a paper requirement, which is not great. If that's the case, there's nothing. Yeah, I don't know. Don't go to those places, maybe. Completely your choice. Yeah, knowing how to do research, knowing what research is as much as possible. And this is hard to learn, actually, but hopefully we have helped you a little, and as well as our great organizers and our host who just joined, provided you with a lot of resources in the beginning of the slides. Pranav will share them again. Yeah.
So I also wanted to say
yes.
that I also applied for my PhD directly after my undergraduate. And I think that one thing that definitely helped a lot was me reaching out to my professors at my university and even outside, wherever I could find someone who was working in like the same area that I thought I had an interest in. And then my interests changed over time as well, but reaching out to, I guess, the people who were in the field really helped when I was trying to apply for my PhD.
Thank you, Khyati.
All right, so this concludes the session and a panel for this. So I will send all the links on the NAACL website and also to all the attendees, all the YouTube links and all the question answers. If anyone wants to answer any questions, feel free to jump in a shared Google Doc. And I will send all the resources to all the attendees. So thanks everyone for joining.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks for organising it.
Right.